Hello and welcome to the Majlis, the podcast by Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, focusing on Central Asia. I'm Mohammed Tahir, your host here in Washington, D.C. More than 6 months after the allegations about the Russian meddling in the last year's U.S. election continue to dominate headlines in Washington, D.C. Russia denies any meddling, but various investigations are underway to get to the bottom of the story. Soon, another crucial elections will be held, and this time it is in the smaller country located in the Russian backyard. I'm talking about Kyrgyzstan. If Russia could disturb the democratic process thousands of miles away in the most powerful democracy in the world, what can it do in a smaller country next door? What it is already doing and what impact it is having. This is the topic of today's discussion on the Majlis. First, let me welcome our panel. From Bishkek, I am joined by Roshan Jinbekov, former Kyrgyz parliamentarian. From Washington, Erika Marat, assistant professor at the College of International Security Affairs, National Defense University, who is originally from Kyrgyzstan. And from Prague, I am joined by Bruce Pannier, the editor of Qishloq Ovozi, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty's Central Asia blog. Welcome on board, ladies and gentlemen.
Hello. Thank you.
Very nice to have you. Let me get straight into the topic. Do you see, Roshan, a Russian meddling in ongoing election process in Kyrgyzstan?
Yes, of course. You're absolutely right that if could influence to American democracy and American election, presidential election, what can we say about small countries like Kyrgyzstan or Russian neighbors or traditional neighbors? Russia traditionally had very big influence to whole Kyrgyz life, especially during election times.
Yeah.
We can say absolutely sure that all Kyrgyz presidents were appointed by the Kremlin. Akayev, Bakiyev, and Atambayev as well. Now they are working on next president. We can not say that Russia work now very openly, but we can say that Russia controls now everything in Kyrgyzstan.
So what it is exactly doing, Roshan?
For example, we cannot say that Russia now doing some special things, because it's very close information. I mean, they work very close. They cannot show their activity on that process. But politicians, we know that Russia can do everything to influence the Kyrgyz election, because they have in Kyrgyzstan everything. KGB, mass media, financial system, our government, which is very loyal to Russia or to Kremlin. And it means they can do nothing, but they will decide who is going to be Kyrgyz president for next 6 years.
No, Roshan, I understand that, but when we allege something like that, we have to put some concrete details on the table. So what is that really?
I cannot say that they're doing something special, but as a politician, I know that all political leaders who are now going to run for presidential election, I know and I'm absolutely sure that they are looking for support of Kremlin. And all their team, they say openly in mass media or when they're discussing about Russian influence to Kyrgyzstan or about who is going to be supported by Russia. Therefore, we know that Russia is working very actively and they can do everything in Kyrgyzstan on this question.
Okay. Erika, let me bring you on here. So how do you see the Russian interference in the ongoing process in Kyrgyzstan? We generally understand that there is something going on, but what is that?
So I agree with Ravshan that Russia controls so many aspects of political life in Kyrgyzstan and economic life. And I think that for any presidential candidate, and there are 30 plus candidates right now, criticizing Russia is suicidal. So no, even if some candidates might not agree with Russian influence, they will not be criticizing. Because unlike, for instance, United States or some other Western countries, Russia does not need to engage in complicated, cyber hacking or whatever procedures. Controlling mass media is enough for Russia in Kyrgyzstan, or Russian mass media that broadcasts from Russia to Kyrgyzstan can influence significantly the public opinion.
Okay, Bruce, as both of our guests are in agreement that Russia doesn't have to kind of get into this adventure of cyber hacking kind of intervention, but it is just generally known fact that Russia is there. So describe us the dynamics locally. What is really happening in that line?
Well, I'd like to start by just mentioning that we actually have evidence of Russia being able to effectively interfere in Kyrgyzstan's election process. If we go back to the 2010 parliamentary elections, a couple months ahead of those elections, it appeared that the Atamakhan party was going to be the clear victor in that, and that they would have the most seats in parliament, and they would end up electing their leader, Omurbek Takibayev, to be the prime minister of Kyrgyzstan. But Takibayev at the time, and this is of course not long after Bakiyev had been thrown out, made a lot of statements that were interpreted as being pro-Western statements, and the Kremlin unleashed its media machine on the Kyrgyz population in one of the first early examples of Russian soft power, really, and swayed the whole election. They had a lot of negative reporting on Takibayev. They had outtakes of him, open microphone kind of stuff where he was criticizing Russia. They really had a whole smear campaign against him, and as a result, Atamakhan did much worse in the 2010 parliamentary elections than anyone would have expected. Polls had shown, just weeks before the election, that they were going to be the clear victor, and Russian media pretty much wiped them out. So we know that it's absolutely possible.
Talking about this,
let me say about two things.
Sure.
First of all, we shouldn't compare Russian influence to American election, Russian influence to Kyrgyz presidential elections. It's absolutely different things. Mm-hmm. When Russia is influencing to American presidential election, it's very difficult. Therefore, they had to think maybe they had to make some special operations. But Kyrgyzstan is very close, and Kyrgyzstan is already under Russia. And Russia had not to think something special here, or had not to make some very special activities, because everything is ready. Russia is here. We are part of Russia, in fact. And therefore, we shouldn't say that, is Russia doing some special things? No, of course no, because everything is ready and already decided. It's different things. And second thing, we have very big difference between parliamentary election and presidential election. In the parliamentary elections time in 2010, Russia a little bit lost control of Kyrgyzstan because of revolution, because of many leaders, and because of many parties, different parties. And they wanted to control, and they had to make some special operations. Yes, I agree with Mr. Bruce in this case. But again, now it's not parliamentary election. Now presidential election. All main candidates, for example, Respublika Atatürk, Mr. Babanov, or existing prime ministers, Soronbay Jeenbekov, or second, third main candidate, former prime minister Temir Sariyev, all of them, they are pro-Russian. And they already did everything for presidential election. All candidates today belongs to Russia and already decided.
Then is anyone bothered by this in Kyrgyzstan, Roshan?
Sure, few politicians, maybe some small part of our society, they are not agree with this tension, with this process. But 90% of our population, they are agree, because by social surveys made by Gallup, IRI, our people, they think that Russia is a good country. Putin is the best president in the world, and he is very active, effective president. Therefore, they think that our candidates, our future presidents, they should look like Putin. And we should be like Russia. And this is our real situation.
Erika, anything to add into this, what Roshan has been saying?
Yeah, I completely agree that there are some politicians and members of society, activists who criticize Russia privately, but no one dares, especially among political leaders and public figures, no one dares to criticize Russia openly, publicly. And again, that's because they can be basically eviscerated from political life through Russian media, should they do that.
Interesting. Then, if this is the situation, why this meddling is not in the headlines? Okay, if it's not possible in Kyrgyzstan, let's talk about the regional media. Let's talk about the international media. The reason why we ended up talking about this topic is not that we had any clue from Kyrgyzstan, but given allegations surrounding Russia's attempts to intervene in U.S. elections, later in French voting, and then the discussion about the possible Russian intervention in forthcoming elections in Germany, we thought how it is really looks like in Russia's own backyard. That's how we ended up talking about the case of Kyrgyzstan. So my question is why this situation is not being discussed yet?
If population, all main presidential candidates, they think that Russia is good country and Putin is good president, how can we discuss this question? Yes, we have few politicians like me, maybe some few political scientists, but this is very small part of our population. This is very small part of our politically active citizens. And we are nothing here to make discussion on this.
So, let me just add something here, because on the one hand, yes, there is Russian media that has a strong propaganda machine built inside Russian media. But at the same time, I think it's important to understand that the population in Kyrgyzstan and other former Soviet countries, they sort of agree with Putin policies despite this propaganda. There are tendencies, and I'm quoting here research conducted by, for instance, Marlene Laruelle, that there are tendencies in the population for more order society, more regulations, more conservative politics. Those can be religious politics or just, strong-handed politics in everyday life to create some kind of order that often lacks because of weak institutions. So seeing Putin as an example of a strong leader who creates order inside his country, but at the same time is such a strong international player in the eyes of the population. I think there is this grassroots support, not just because of propaganda, but also because that's what a lot of people would like to see. They would like to see a little bit more organized life.
Okay, in this case, I see, Roshan, you clearly not in line with the majority of thinking in Kyrgyzstan. So what can you really do about this? And also, it doesn't say something about failure of a camp that you belong to in Kyrgyzstan?
Yeah, sure. Today, pro-Western or pro-democracy oriented politicians, they cannot be in this process. They cannot even go to the election. Yes, we have some candidates who are pro-democracy oriented, pro-Western oriented, like Rita Karasartova or Kamila Shashikeva, former American University rector. But this is very small amount, and we are all politicians, all the main population. We know that they are not gonna be our president. They are making that just attempt. They're trying. And this is very difficult today to go against Russian propaganda, against Russian political system, political regime staying in Kyrgyzstan, founded in Kyrgyzstan.
Bruce, you've been very silent today.
No, I'm listening. I'm learning something here. I would say what I would pitch in here is we got to look at where Kyrgyzstan is located. Yeah. It's in the heart of the Eurasian landmass. It's a landlocked country. And its population is a little more than 6 million. Now it's got Kazakhstan to the north and Uzbekistan, which until recently has not been a friendly neighbor, and then of course China. See, if you're in that kind of situation, you're going to have to look for a reliable and strong partner. At least you want to find a reliable and strong partner. Now, Russia is someone that they know for a long time. Now, I think if you ask the majority of the people, would you rather have a lot of Russian influence or would you rather have a strong Kyrgyz state that can stand on its own feet and guide itself as it wishes, and represent the will of the people, that most people would take the latter. They would rather have a country with a strong government that was able to do what it wanted without having to worry about what kind of reaction its immediate neighbors would have or anything like that. But that's not the situation here. We have hundreds of thousands of Kyrgyz citizens that are currently working in Russia, for instance, and the money that they send back is nothing but good news to the people back home in Kyrgyzstan, nothing but good news to the Kyrgyz government too. And it's going up, whereas that's not true in the case of other countries that send great numbers of migrant laborers to Russia, like Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, where the numbers are down and the amount of money coming back is also down. So Kyrgyzstan, admittedly, that's partly because they're a member of the Eurasian Economic Union, but they do get a lot of pluses from being close to Russia, and it does. Although Russia exerts influence, within the Russian influence, there is some room to move around for Kyrgyz politicians and for the Kyrgyz state. So that, they're not, although, you could say that they're pretty much under Russia's thumb, you could make that claim, but within Kyrgyzstan itself, the government does function autonomously. So they might be under Russia's hand, but it's not a heavy hand at the moment, and they have been there when Kyrgyzstan really needs a big partner in the world.
Interesting. So, Erika, Roshan, please feel free to jump in to respond to this question. So, in the way that you guys have described, in a situation like this, what does it really say about the legitimacy of an election process?
I think that what Bruce is saying is really interesting because Kyrgyzstan shows that a country can experiment with political system and have some features of democratic process. And again, the two women who are running for President Karasatova and Shishakeva are such examples that they will diversify the political discussions during political campaigns before the elections, and at the same time be extremely pro-Russian. And that's a very interesting phenomenon that we don't really see much in post-Soviet space, that on the one hand you have some democratic features, on the other hand the country is completely pro-Russian. But I think the dangers here is that those democratic processes that we see evolving, they don't develop to the potential that they could develop. They hit certain limit, and then beyond that the discussion stalls, and we are not able to, for instance, what I saw Karasartova discussing on her Facebook page, even though she's a human rights activist and has a very strong background in civic activism, she is limited in how much she can discuss, for instance, gay rights or other human rights issues, because that's where she crosses the line between looking too pro-Western and in disagreement with some of the popular policies promoted by Russia and by many Kyrgyzstan's politicians as well.
Yes, we are talking obviously about Russian intervention in the local elections in Kyrgyzstan. Is Russia only external player here, or you are witnessing more and more foreign countries involved in this or the other way in the democratic process of Kyrgyzstan, like elections?
I would say main player or who is influencing Kyrgyzstan's political life is, of course, Russia. But during presidential elections time or parliamentarian elections time, we sometimes can see Kazakhstan as one of the maybe active player who wants to influence the political life of Kyrgyzstan as well. But their influence is very small, and their influence is controlled by Russia. Yes, China is here, but I know that as a politician, China is not influencing political life, and China is working only on economical and investment life of Kyrgyzstan.
Okay. Thank you very much, Roshan. As it become clear from the discussion that it's not the first time that Russia is doing this. Kyrgyzstan is the land of revolutions and political instability, but Russia has always been a factor, as you said. After the break, let's look into the history of Russian involvement in the previous elections, in political life of the country, and analyze what impact Moscow has been having on overall society. Hey everyone, before we get into the second part of the show, just a quick reminder that if you really like Majlis podcast, there's a real chance that you will also like my other radio show that's called Gandhara Podcast. The show discusses latest developments in Pakistan and Afghanistan from local perspective. And the podcast is published in every second week on Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty's Gandhara website. It's a totally must-follow discussion for foreign policy nerds with interest in the region. First, just to recap the debate that today on the Majlis, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty Central Asia podcast, we are discussing Russia's intervention in ongoing campaign and previous elections in Kyrgyzstan. Joining me in the discussion are Roshan Jinbekov, former Kyrgyz parliamentarian, Erika Marat, assistant professor of the College of International Security Affairs at the National Defense University in Washington, D.C., and Bruce Pannier, the editor of Qishloq Ovozi, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty Central Asia blog. I am Mohammed Tahir, host of the Majlis here in Washington, D.C. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Before the break, we were talking about the Russian meddling in ongoing process in Kyrgyzstan. Looking back into the previous elections, what do you recall in terms of the history of Russia's interference in elections in Kyrgyzstan? How this intervention historically looks like, and what has been some of the striking examples so far? Let's start with you, Bruce.
Well, I mentioned the parliamentary elections, of course, in 2010, and I think that was one of the more striking instances of what was clearly Russian interference in the election. And again, it was all done by soft power. They used the Russian media that was available in Kyrgyzstan to sideline Omurbek Tekibayev and his Atamaken party. I mean, there's a lot of things that go into this. We've already heard that most people in Kyrgyzstan, Russia is seen as a reliable and I suppose popular partner for Kyrgyzstan. So it's if you're a candidate and you can get a chance to get an invitation at the Kremlin and shake hands with Putin or Medvedev or somebody like that ahead of elections, this is something that you're absolutely gonna want to do. And we've seen people try to do this in the past too, where it's a big prestige mark for their campaign if they can get out there to Moscow and meet with top officials and put those pictures up back at home. I mean, it really does say a lot. And Russia knows that this is the way it is, so they understanding that they have their pick of whoever they want to support. They can just bring them out and have them do a 20-minute meeting with Putin or like I said, even Medvedev, take a lot of pictures, and that's going to say a lot to the people back in Kyrgyzstan. And this has been done before throughout Kyrgyzstan, and even back in the days of Akayev, that it was a big deal for Akayev to try to get to Moscow and meet with, then Yeltsin, later Putin, ahead of the election, so that he could be seen on TV meeting with the Russian leader. And like I said, Russia knows this. So, I'm sure the campaign teams of many of the people who have expressed an interest in running in this election are already contacting anyone they can find in Russia and trying to see if they can't arrange some kind of meeting with a high-level Russian officials so that they can take, for a photo op that they can use during the campaign.
Erika, what is your thoughts on this in terms of the striking examples of Russian interference in the election process of Kyrgyzstan historically?
So not so much election process, but notorious case is when Bakiyev was attacked by Russian media in 2010, just a couple of weeks before mass demonstrations in Bishkek. So yeah, that's an example. Some analysts say that Russian criticism of Bakiyev's government really contributed to mobilization of opposition and broader population. So that's a good example. But I also would like to highlight the absence of Russian propaganda during elections. And I think that's also very significant, that Russia is not, for instance, not criticizing Atambayev or attacking any specific candidate. But of course, lack of this attention on specific candidates from Russian media, it doesn't really register in many analysts' minds, but it's still significant to see, because I think compared to what we saw in 2010, 2011, I think Russian government in general doesn't really see this necessity to specifically attack or intervene in an election, because again, what I said earlier, in this particular election, this year, Russia knows that they will be able to influence whoever is elected. And there are, 2 or 3 candidates who have realistic chances of being elected. And all of them, as Ravshan says, all of them are openly and happily pro-Russian. So there isn't really need to spend energy on propaganda campaigns here. And I think that tells a lot about the actual influence of Russian government.
I would say about Bruce's argument that the picture is with President Putin or President Medvedev is very important and has very big influence to Kyrgyz voters. It's true. The second thing is, Erika told that it's mass media. ORT, RTR, NTV, or all Russian main state-controlled mass medias, Sputnik, Russia Today, all of them, they will support some candidate maybe later, not now. Now it's very quiet and nothing. But later, I think we will see that all Russian mass media, they will support someone. And we will see who is going to be Kyrgyz president after this. The third thing is, of course, financial question. All in parliamentary and election time, all parties, they went to Russia to have money around Kremlin business persons. I cannot say from whom, but all parties looked for money from Russia. Can you imagine that 6 years ago, when President Atambayev was going to run, who was the bodyguard of President Atambayev, candidate of President Atambayev? It was Russian bodyguards. And every politician in Kyrgyzstan, they know about this.
Interesting. Bruce, forgive my ignorance. Maybe it's not in their mandate, but I'm talking about the election observers, foreign election observers like OSCEs, maybe some others. When they monitor elections or when they have monitored elections in Kyrgyzstan, was it part of their reporting that the role that Russia played in that?
But specifically, I do not remember that was part of any of their post-election assessments. They surely have to be aware of that. I mean, it's the parts of the OSCE and assessments that I remember was there fair access to the media for all the candidates, and things to do with campaigning and how the vote was actually carried out on election day. And we know, of course, that they've had some problems with voting on election day. That's for sure. A lot of people will tell you that votes can be bought, and in my personal experience with being in Kyrgyzstan is sadly that to some extent that is true. But that's what the OSCE more or less focuses on these things. That said, again, the OSCE is certainly aware of this, and I think Kyrgyzstan gets a lot of points from Western monitors for the fact that their elections are just so much better than any other Central Asian country. I was there for the parliamentary elections just a couple of years ago, and I thought they were just fantastic. Campaigning was, again, election day they had some problems, but as far as campaigning, access to the voters and everything, I didn't really see any problems at all. And the OSCE validated a lot of my opinions when they came out with their assessment. They seemed to agree with that was true too. So it's kind of a rough job for the OSCE monitors, because on the one hand there are things that are going wrong, but on the other hand, if you're an OSCE monitor and you were just an observer at Kazakhstan's presidential elections or Uzbekistan's presidential elections or something, then of course Kyrgyzstan's elections look far better. There's no question about it at all.
Yeah.
So it's tough.
But I also see there's some fault in this, Bruce, because the stories that you are describing, like voting regulations, the access to media, and all these things, it become kind of secondary, or maybe micro-level arrangements that everybody knows that those candidates are influenced, controlled by Russia. So at the end, they are all voting for that direction. So then the micro-level arrangement really, doesn't mean anything.
Well, of course, if you're talking about an election as being a mandate from the masses, then I think most of the people in Kyrgyzstan, even if they were willing to admit that, yeah, I voted for a pro-Russian candidate, would feel that they were really voting their conscience with that. It wasn't like they were forced to or thought that for some reason because that candidate was pro-Russian, that's the person they should vote for. I mean, they really feel in their hearts that this is the candidate, that they, most of them anyway, that this is the candidate they want to vote for, knowing that they're pro-Russian and knowing that their candidate of choice might have received a lot of money or help from Russia, and that doesn't really sway their opinion when they get into the polling stations.
Maybe, Erika, you want to jump in here. It also appears that most of the people, if they are voting out of their conscience that Moscow is the direction to go for Kyrgyz people in general. So it seems that there was a problem in explaining to people in Kyrgyzstan that there are also other systems other than the Russian system that in many ways better. So maybe it was a failure on behalf of democratic forces in that country to explain that.
Yeah, of course. It is a failure of media in general, and including Kyrgyzstan's media, to go just beyond the Russian-centric interpretations of things and move beyond the Russian language informative zone. Yeah, there were some discussions in 2010 before the new constitution was voted for in June 2010. Discussions of how other parliamentary systems function, like in Eastern Europe and some other Asian countries, and that was a very interesting discussion. And it did go beyond Russian political system. But after that, I think both mass media and political leaders are at fault here. They don't really see beyond Russia. They consider Russia to be the example for good governance. And that's in a big difference to Kazakhstan, for instance. Kazakhstan constantly looking for international examples to replicate at home. And policy building has a little different mechanism in Kazakhstan, but still they are looking for different examples beyond Russia. In the West, in Asia. Kyrgyzstan is a little limited here. And what's interesting is Russian media today, both traditional and online media now, new media, they are so much more informative and so much more professional. For instance, if you're looking for comprehensive information on the candidates running in the election, you would have to go to Sputnik.kg, the Russian resource. All other media kind of present bits of information here and there, but nothing as professional as or as comprehensive as what Sputnik does. So in 2011, when kind of shifting attention back to how international organizations observing elections react to Russian media influence. In 2011, when Tygyabayev proposed that Russian channels are controlled or pre-recorded and then transmitted so that any content influencing parliamentary elections in Kyrgyzstan is omitted from broadcast. This proposal by Tygyabayev, I think it was eventually implemented, but international organizations sort of had a silent support of this proposal. They understood the magnitude of influence that Russian TV media can have on elections, and they didn't criticize it. They didn't see it as control of free speech or free media or whatever else. So I think if we see influence coming from Russian media in the run-up to the election, so a month before election day, if we do see that, I hope that international organizations will also notice that and see it as an interference in the election. So that's one more element to control for when we do a fair assessment of the election process in Kyrgyzstan.
Mm-hmm. And also we are coming into the end of the discussion and taking back this idea, Erika, to Kyrgyzstan. Roshan, I'm coming back to you. In terms of reaction to, let's say, Russian meddling, what has been some of the highlights so far in Kyrgyzstan? Highlights of someone who stand up against this, highlight of someone who was able to succeed despite the Russian opposition?
As I already told, that not much politicians who are oriented pro-Western or pro-democracy. Many of our politicians, they love Russia, they love Putin, and to go against this ideology, it's in Kyrgyzstan very, very difficult. Who are against this ideology? They are American spy, and they have too many problems with our government and mass media.
Oh, okay. Briefly, please, Bruce and Erika on this point.
Go ahead, Erika.
So what Ravshan says is that, if you somehow doubt Russian influence and criticize it, you are considered to be pro-Western and automatically financed and corrupt by Western interests, by whatever Western NGOs or maybe U.S. government. So yeah, it's a black and white picture very often. And I think candidates like Karasartova or Shashikeva, they really have to walk a very fine line of, on the one hand, sticking to their principles and ideals, and on the other hand, not falling into the stereotype of being corrupt by Western money.
Bruce,
which is, of course, not true.
Bruce, a final point. So what to do about this black and white picture? If Kyrgyzstan wants to be a genuine democracy, it has to overcome with this.
Well, I mean, their political system is still advancing and evolving. It's not, this isn't hopeless. It's more a situation of there's a process that's already underway. Now, they switched to, or they are trying to move toward a parliamentary system of government. I think when most people, President Putin, first and foremost, when they think of the head of state of Kyrgyzstan, they think of Atambayev, and that's actually wrong under the form of government that they have right now. That should not be who people are thinking about. But for what it's worth, Kyrgyzstan is headed in that direction, although slowly, and admittedly, they don't have a lot of experience with it. And not many countries really do have a lot of it. If you look at 190 whatever countries in the world, not many have experience with parliamentary democracy, and parliamentary system of government. So they're on the right road, but it would be expecting a lot to think that 26 years after independence, not even that, and only 7 years after they adopted a parliamentary system of government, that they would be so advanced and so their system would be sturdy, strong enough that it could, resist Russian influence and, any outside influence, would be asking just a little bit too much. But I mean, I certainly have not lost hope, and I think that things will turn around for the better in Kyrgyzstan. Certainly, in terms of socioeconomics, there's some advancement that needs to be made too. It's hard to resist outside pressures when you need outside help. So on the right path, but still ways to go.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you very much for your wise thoughts, Bruce.
Yeah.
And also, big thanks to Roshan Jinbekov, former Kyrgyz parliamentarian, and Erika Murat, assistant professor at the College of International Security Affairs, National Defense University in Washington, D.C., for your time and thoughts today.
Thank you.
This is it from me, Mohammed Tahir, host of the Majlis, Radio for Europe, Radio Liberty Central Asia podcast. Until next week, bye-bye.